Eruvin, Dafim Kuf Gimel through Kuf Hey, and Pesahim, Dafim Beis through Hey, Daf Kuf Gimel. The Mishnah says, Kohen Shalaka Be'etzbo, a Kohen who has an injury on his finger, he wraps a kind of bandage on it, he puts a gemi on it. B'mikdash he can do that, but not Medina, not outside the Mikdash. The context of the Mishnah is refuah. You're not allowed to do acts that are for medicinal purposes on Shabbos. In the Mikdash they allowed it. But the Gemara discusses the question of a Kohen putting on a band-aid from the perspective of the laws of Kohanim. The Gemara has two issues. One issue is Yitur Begadim. A Kohen has to wear only the prescribed number of garments, 4 for a Kohen Hedyot, 8 for a Kohen Gadol. And the other issue is Chatzitza. The Begadim, there can't be anything on the Kohen's skin between his skin and the garment. There also can't be things on the Kohen's hand, between his hand and the klishares, the things he does the avoda with. So the Gemara discusses the question of Yitur Begadim, of having an extra beged, which is a problem for a Kohen, as well as the problem of Chatzitza. The Gemara brings different opinions. We paskin like Rava. Again, Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin the laws of Kohanim, but the Rambam paskins the laws of Kohanim. We paskin like Rava, that b'makom begadim, that if there's a chatzitza, bandage, anything between the Kohen's skin and the garment, even nema achas chatzetzes, even a single hair, even a small thing could be chatzetzes. Shelo b'makom begadim, but if the thing he's wearing, the bandage or whatever it is on a part of his body, not where the begadim are, a part of his exposed skin, then the rule is shalosh al shalosh chatzetzes. 3 by 3 is a problem of chatzitza, but less than that is not. Rashi, other Rishonim explain, the issue is not chatzitza. If it's on the exposed part of his skin, then it's not between his skin and the garment. So why is there a psul of shalosh al shalosh? So the reason is, it's really because of yitur begadim. That if it's three or more, it's considered a significant beged, and then it is considered yitur begadim. The language of chatzitza is lav dafka. If it's less than 3, then it's not yitur begadim. There's another statement in the Gemara. Rav Yehuda Breid Rav Chia says, a gemi is an insignificant thing, is not yitur begadim, but a tziltzul katan, something which is chashuv, which is more significant, is a problem, even if it, and that we paskin is even if it is less than 3. So the way the Rambam brings these halachas, that the halacha is the big dekuna have to be al basaro levesham, the garments of the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen have to be directly on the skin. Can't be any chatzitza. We paskin afilu nema achas, even a single thread between his, even a dead insect, dirt between his skin and the garment and the big dekuna is a problem. That's a chatzitza. But if it's shelo b'makom begadim, like for example the things you wrap on the fingers or the feet that are not covered by the garments, so shalosh etzbos, when the Gemara says shalosh, it means shalosh etzbos, 3 fingers by 3 fingers is chotzetz, pachs mikan eina chotzetz. Again, pashtus the Rambam means that it's yitur begadim, that if it's more than 3, it's 3 etzbos or more, it's yitur begadim. Less than that, it's okay. Tziltzul katan is chashuv, and then it's a problem even if it's less than shalosh al shalosh. That is how the Rambam paskins. In the Sefer Chevel Nachlaso, or Rav Yaakov Epstein, a contemporary posik, he talks about whether a Kohen can wear glasses. So there are 3 issues, he says. There's yitur begadim, he's wearing an extra garment besides big dekahuna, potentially. It's chatzitza maybe. And and he has a mum. If he needs glasses, that means he has an impairment, a visual impairment. Maybe that's a problem of mum. So we're not going to get into the question of mum. Chatzitza would seem not to be an issue if it's on an exposed part of the body. The question is yitur begadim. Rav Epstein says glasses is not called yitur begadim. He says it doesn't have the dimensions of shalosh al shalosh etzbos, and it's not a beged. He says it's even though it's tziltzul katan is possible even when it's small, it's something chashuv. He says. But he feels glasses, and they're not gimel etzbos, and they're not beged at all, so they wouldn't be a problem. One can debate that. One can argue that even if they're not gimel etzbos, one can argue it's like tziltzul katan, they're chashuv. Glasses can be very expensive. They're very important for the person. They help him see. One could argue, without knowing exactly what a tziltzul katan is, one could argue glasses are chashuv. They still might not be a garment, so we could debate l'chara the question of yitur begadim. Rambam goes on. The Rambam says, he brings the Mishnah about putting a gemi, putting this kind of bandage on the finger. So the Rambam says you can do it if it doesn't have gimel al gimel etzbos, because gimel al gimel etzbos is yitur begadim. So the Rambam paskins, if it's less than gimel al gimel, it is fine. So more than gimel al gimel, it is a problem. So the Ravid has a problem. The Ravid says that the Rambam earlier seemed to paskin that less than gimel al gimel is the less than gimel al gimel is not a chatzitza and is okay, so as long as it's not between the garment and the skin. Here the Rambam says that even if it's less than gimel al gimel, there's an additional condition shlo yachutz hagemi between the klisharis that he's holding. Even a small gemi, like a regular band-aid that we use, it's less than gimel al gimel at suppose. It can't be chotzeitz between the hand and the kli. It would be under the begadim, even less than 3 is a problem. Even a single hair is a problem. If it's not under the begadim, so it's not a chatzitza of less than 3, but not a chatzitza. It's not yiter begadim because it's less than 3 etzvos. It's insignificant, but it can still be a chatzitza even if it's less than 3 etzvos between the kohen's hand and the kli. But earlier the Rambam said that if you have something on your hand and it's less than 3 etzvos, it's not chatzitz. Chatzitzas of small things are not a problem, even though they're a problem under the garments. But a chatzitza between the hand and the kli shares of less than 3 etzvos is not a problem. How do we reconcile this contradiction in the Rambam? So the Achronim explain, the Kesef Mishnah and the Radvaz explain that when the Gemara says, when the Rambam says, when the Gemara says that less than 3 etzvos is not chotzeitz, it means like Rashi, it's not yiter begadim. The chatzitza is still a problem, and you have to avoid putting it between your hand and the kli. You put it on a different part of the hand that's not touching the kli. But if you put it between the hand and the kli, Shitas Rambam is that even less than 3 etzvos is a problem. Any chatzitza between the kohen's hand and the kli sharis is a problem, just like between the beged and the kohen is a problem. Between the hand and the kli, it's a problem. The Shitas Rambam is that even less than 3 etzvos could be a chatzitza. Ravid Shita is that less than 3 etzvos is not a chatzitza, it seems. But Rambam Shita is that even less than 3 etzvos, even the gemi, even the band-aid, even though it's less than 3 etzvos, cannot be between the hand and the kli. The Radvaz says maybe it's only l'chatchila. The Radvaz brings up shot that less than 3 is not chotzeitz b'di'eved between the hand and the kli, but l'chatchila it's a problem. I'll call upon him. That is the Shitas Rambam, that even less than 3 etzvos can be a chatzitza between the yad and the kli sharis. We don't have the Beis HaMikdash today and the Avoda and the Heri Yibana Beis HaMikdash, but this question or a similar question comes up in other areas of halacha. Do we worry about chatzitza between the hand and the thing you're holding in the hand of small amounts? This comes up in several areas in halacha. The laws of mikvah for a woman are very strict, but even other areas of halacha, there are debates in the poskim how strict we have to be. In the laws of arba minim, the Ramah says when you hold your lulav and esrog, the minhag is we take off the tefillin and we take off rings. We don't hold the lulav and esrog with anything on our hand being chotzeitz between our hand and the lulav and esrog because it's a kind of a chatzitza. Take off tefillin, take off rings. Those who wear tefillin, take off rings. Midina, the Ramah says, mikra din ein lachush, because the whole hand is not covered. So similar to what the Ravid says, similar to what the Rambam says, similar to what the Ravid says, that less than 3 or small amounts are not a chatzitza. The Rambam seems to say, at least between the kohen's hand and the kli sharis, even less than 3 is a problem. When it comes to the rings and the tefillin, between the hand and the lulav, we say, l'chatchila, you should take them off. Mikra din, the Ramah says, it's not a problem. But the Mishnah Berurah says, many achronim say, mikra din, it is a problem of a chatzitza, even though the whole hand is not covered. Mishnah Berurah says you should take lulav again. If you forgot to take off your rings or your tefillin, you should take the lulav again. So that's machlokes achronim, whether even a small chatzitza between the hand and the lulav is a problem. Also comes up in Halachos Gittin. The Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch say the minhag when a woman receives a get is she should not have anything in her hand that would be a chatzitza between the hand and the get. She should take off any ring that she has when she gets the get. The poskim debate, how serious is this? Is this just a chumrah? Is this meikar adin? Rav Adi Yosef and the Yalkut Yosef, his son, they talk about if a woman has a bandage, it's hard to take it off, it would cause her pain. Is there basis for leniency to give the get with while her hand is bandaged? So they say yes, you can be mekel. And they point out that when it comes to lulav, even though there's a chumrah that we take off rings, the Ramah says it's not medina. And so it's who didn't get, they say, when it comes to get, if the bandage is only on part of the hand, and it's so many poskim say it's okay. So if it causes tsar, then you can leave it on. You don't have to be strict and take it off. It's only a minute to take it off, and if it's tsar, then you don't have to be so strict about it. On Daf Kuf Daled, the Gemara brings a story, an anecdote. Ula visited Be'er Rav Menashe, and a certain man knocked on the door. They said that's a terrible thing. You're not allowed to knock on doors on Shabbos. You're not allowed to make noise on Shabbos. So Rabbah said, Lo asru ela kol shel shir. There is an isser of making noise on Shabbos, but that noise is only a joyful noise. That noise is only a musical noise. You're allowed to make arbitrary noise on Shabbos. You're allowed to knock on doors as long as you're not making music. This is how we paskin in Shulchan Aruch. Hashma is called b'kli shir is aser. Making music on Shabbos, making music with a musical instrument is asur. However, to knock on a door, which is not musical, that is mutter. However, the Ramad brings a chumrah, Shem the Agar, I think, he brings a chumrah that you're not allowed to knock on the door with a door knocker. There was some doors still have them, the rings or the door knockers, an implement which is designated to make noise, even though it's not music, that is still asur. It's not meant to make music, you're not making music. If it's a kli hamiyuchad lekach, if it's a kli which is designated as a noisemaker, you're not allowed to use it on Shabbos. That's how we paskin. Poskim try to understand where the isur comes from, why it's asur. Is it somehow included in the gzeira of music? Is it uvdin dechol? So poskim struggle to understand what the reason is, but that's a chumrah that we have, that Ashkenazim have, following the Ramah, that we don't use kli, at least Ashkenazim, we don't use a kli hamiyuchad lekach. You have to use your hand to knock on the door. Poskim say you can use other kalim as long as they're not kalim hamiyuchad lekach. Mishnah Berurah brings that the shamash would sometimes bang on the tables or to get people's attention. So even if he uses a kli, he says that's okay because it is not a kli hamiyuchad lekach. He uses some kind of stick. They use some kind of stick to bang. That's okay as long as it is not a kli hamiyuchad lekach. In some places, the shamash would use a different kli, a special kli for Shabbos. When he bangs on the table to get people to be quiet for chazaras hashatz, there was always a problem, he says. So certainly, if you use your hand, it's certainly okay. And even if you use a stick, as long as it's not a kli hamiyuchad lekach, that is okay. The clapping is okay if it's not musical. If it's just to amuse a child, it's okay. Applause, poskim say. But clapping as music, that can be a problem, even if it's not a kli. Music is asur to clap or to clap to a beat even without a keli. But making noise without a keli, or even with a keli, if it's not musical noise, it is okay, unless it's a kli hamiyuchad lekach, then we are machmer. The Mishnah Berurah brings, the Bir Halacha brings an extended debate about some of the parochases, the curtains in front of the Aron Kodesh. They had bells, Sefer Torah had bells, and so on. Poskim had a great debate about whether you're allowed to do that and have that in place on Shabbos. When you bring the Torah out, you open the parochas, there'll be a tinkling of bells. Some poskim are machmer. The Taz is machmer. The Shach, Magen Avraham, or Mekil, they have several arguments. One argument is that for a mitzvah we're more lenient, for the mitzvah of Sefer Torah and covered for the Torah and Hiddur mitzvah, I guess, we're more Mekil. Just like on Simchas Torah, we're more lenient about some of the halachas. We can dance on Simchas Torah even though we're not allowed to dance on a regular Shabbos. And the other argument they make is that it's not your intention. You're not machaving to meshmiya kol. When you're just taking out the Torah, you're opening the parochas, you have no intention to make noise, so there's no issur. Shabbos, sometimes, if it's a psik reisha, we say you're not allowed to do things that are inevitably going to cause noise, going to cause an issur, but in this case, the issur of making noise, there's no issur, even though these bells and things might be miyuchad lekach, but if it's not your intention to make the noise when you bring them out, then there is no issur. There are a number of achronim going in both directions. The Mishnah Berurah says that the similar question they talk about, if there's a door, the door has a bell, like some stores have it, you open the door and the bell tinkles. Are you allowed to open such a door on Shabbos? So again, it's machlokes achronim. The Mishnah Berurah says it's machlokes achronim, and he brings it. Although some achronim are mekel, he says certainly it's better to remove these bells before Shabbos from the parochas, from the door, or to stuff them up with rags and stuffing so they don't make noise. The Makom Adchak, he says, if you didn't take them out, you can be somech on the mekilim and say that you're allowed to do this, you're allowed to use the Sefer Torah, open the door on Shabbos, even though it will make a tinkling bell noise when you open it. Other achronim are more mekel. The Aruch HaShulchan says it's mutter legamri, following the lenient views. So this is a major machlokes achronim, something which is intended to make noise, but if not your intention when you use it, your intention is to open the door and get inside, that's a major machlokas. The Mishnah Berurah is machmer, but lenient b'shas v'tchak. Other poskim are mekel legamri, like the Aruch HaShulchan. Poskim talk about actually ringing a bell. They didn't have electric bells. They had bells that you pull a string. That the Mishnah Berurah says to pull a string that will ring a bell. Many achronim say is asur. However, that for Kavod Shabbos, he says that if you really need to get in, you can't get in. If they don't hear the bell, you won't get in. There is some basis for leniency, and you can be somech on the mekilim for Kavod Shabbos to pull the bell string to ring the bell. That's because that's because of this idea that a kli hamiyuchad lekach is normally asur. So But there is some basis for leniency for Kavod Shabbos if you can't get inside and you're stuck. However, just to ring the bell, he says, to call your servant, to get the servant's attention, that's not such a tzarech, he says, and that's not such a tzarech, and you shouldn't be makel at all because you'll survive, and it's a zilzal Shabbos to go ringing bells on Shabbos. You shouldn't do that. The Aruch HaShulchan is more lenient on this as well. He says even the string that you pull the bell, he says you're allowed to pull a bell, you're allowed to pull a string to ring a bell. It's not music, he says. For some reason, he doesn't consider this kli hamiyuchad lekach. It's pulling the string to ring the bell. He says is okay. Certainly, he says the parochas and those other cases are okay. But the kli hamiyuchad lekach, even he agrees that you should not use. Post can talk about children's toys, rattles, and other cars that go whir or vroom when you pull them or use them. So Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen says a child under the age of chinuch can do whatever he wants, can play with toys. Once he reaches the age of chinuch, he should not use toys that are designed to make noise. He certainly shouldn't use musical instruments, a flute or a whistle, he says. However, but if a toy whose primary use does not require noise, but it's augmented with a noisemaker, I guess like a car, the car drives around, it also makes a vrooming noise. He gives an example of a merry-go-round that makes clicks when it spins. So that, he says, is a machlokes achronim. He says it's similar to the machlokes about the bells on the Sefer Torah and the bells on the door. They are designed to make noise, but the primary function of the door is to open and close, and that's not your intention to make the noise, even though the noise is deliberately designed aspect of the operation. That's a machlokes, he says. So when it comes to children, he says, even if the child is higia l'chinuch, you can allow the child to play with a toy that makes a noise if it's not the primary function of the toy, like a whistle or a rattle, and the child is not interested in the noise. The child wants to play with the car, it happens to make a noise. But if they deliberately want the noise, he's stricter on that. And anyway, he says, machlokes haposkim, we saw the Mishnah Berurah is stricter about this, the Aruch Shulchan is more lenient, he says. An adult should not rely on the lenient ruling. An adult should not play with these toys that make noise, where the noise is a deliberate part of the operation, even though it's not the primary purpose of the toy, even if he doesn't want it. An adult should be machmer, he says. One could argue it's a shailin and drabanan, there's more basis for leniency, but an adult, he feels, should be machmer, while for a child, even higia l'chinuch, there is basis for leniency. On Daf Kuf Hey, the Mishnah talks about someone who traveled outside the Tchum. So the Tanakama says even 1 amma you're stuck. That's the Ikra Din. Once you leave the Tchum, even by a single amma, you can't return. Rabbi Shimon says you have a margin of error of 15 ammas. You can still return. Why? She'ein hamashuchos and matzinas amidas and pnei hatoim, because the measurements are not exact. So when they tell you the Tchum ends here, you really have a little more space. This is a sugya primarily earlier in the Masechta and Daf Nun Beis. What does it mean pnei hatoim? That earlier the Gemara said pnei toei hamida, because of errors having to do with the midah. What does that mean? Rashi brings 2 pshatim. One pshat is that they knew that people would sometimes leave the tchum inadvertently, so they deliberately set the tchum. They made a margin of safety and the margin of error. They set the tchum deliberately short, so people should have a little bit of a margin of safety if they stepped outside the tchum. Rashi brings another pshat that the people who calculated the tchum made errors in the calculation. Rashi explains, hey, you get to 15 ammas, but there were errors that would accumulate in the course of 2,000 ammas to 15 ammas. So since the calculation was not done properly, it was really 15 ammas short, so you have more space. Rambam has a third shot. Rambam says there are different girsos in the Rambam, but the way we have it in the Rambam, the traditional girsa was that since when it came to mountains and valleys, they sometimes overestimated how much space it took, so the tchum would be a little. They sometimes underestimated how much the mountain was, and therefore they were afraid the tchum would be a little bit too far. They deliberately took back some of that space. They deliberately made it shorter to account for the error in the other direction of the mountains, and then they overcompensated. They cut the tchum short to be yotze the suffix, and maybe when they got to the mountain they added too much space. Maybe they went too far, so they made it shorter. So we know, and we think they overcompensate, so the tchum is a little bit short. According to Rav Kapach's Girs in the Rambam, that it was simply that when it came to the mountains, they wouldn't calculate exactly. They would deliberately be machmer and make it shorter than to avoid any fakers. They would make it short, and they made it too short. So one way or another, the Rambam Shita is that because of difficulties in calculating correctly, the tchum was deliberately made a little bit shorter than we think it actually is. The first shot of Rashi, though, is particularly interesting. That when Chazal were afraid that people, if they gave the exact share, the people would inadvertently violate the tchum, so they deliberately understated the tchum in order that people shouldn't do the isser. This is an interesting public policy question. When Chazal establish rules or shiurim, should we tell the public exactly what the real share is, or should we not do that? Should we deliberately build in a margin of error into our shiurim, because in case people won't, we don't want people running exactly up to the limit? Is this something we should do in general? When we tell the public a share, when we tell the public a number or a limit, should we deliberately build in a margin of safety in order to reduce the likelihood that someone will inadvertently violate? I don't have other examples where we actually do this, but it's an interesting public policy question. We begin with Pesahim. First words of the first Mishnah in Daf Beis. Ar l'arba asar bodkines achametz la'ar haner. Erev Pesach, the night of the 14th, we do b'dikas chametz by candlelight. Why do we do b'dikas chametz? So Rashi says, because if you have chametz in your house and you are not bodek it, you would violate the prohibition of bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. There's a lavim in the Torah against having chametz in your possession. By checking, you avoid violating that lav. Tosfos says that we do bittul chametz anyway. Since we're going to do bittul, and bittul works midaraisa. So bidik is not enough. You have to do bittul anyway. Once you do bittul is enough. So what's the point of bidika? So Tosfos says bidika, so you shouldn't find it and eat it. But bal yirah is not an issue. Some achronim explain that the shita of Tosfos is that bidika doesn't help. That if you look for chametz and you missed chametz, you would still be over bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. So bidika doesn't really help. Maybe it reduces the likelihood, even if you wouldn't do bittul. Rav Elyashiv understands, Tosfos holds, even if you don't do that if you don't do bittul and you're bodek and you find chametz, you'll still be over the. I'm not sure if that's muchach and Tosfos, but other Rishonim seem to hold like this. The Rosh and the Tur seem to hold that after your bodek, if you miss chametz, you'll still be over bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. Rashi, some understand, Rav Elyashiv understands. Rashi holds no. Once you did a bedika, even if you missed chametz, you're not over bal yirah. According to Rashi, bedika accomplishes that you're no longer over bal yirah, even if you miss chametz. Once you made a proper, good faith bedika, otherwise you would have been over, but if once you do a bedika, you're not over even if there is chametz. And Tosfos, some understand, or other Rishonim hold, that even if you do a good faith bedika, if you actually miss any chametz, then you'll still be over bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. So whatever Rashi and Tosfos hold about this question, it is a machlokes poskim, whether a person who does bedikas chametz and for some reason forgot to do bittul, will he be over bal yirah, bal yimatzeh? It's a machlokes. So pashtus is like Tosfos, that you are over. The Torah says bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. If you have chametz, you tried but you failed, so you'd be over bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. Why would Rashi say, why would other poskim say that if a person did a proper bedika, he's not over bal yirah, bal yimatzeh? So the poskim give a variety of different svaras. Some poskim say misasik. The halacha is, even though shogeg is still an aveira, if you make a mistake, you forget it's Shabbos, you forget it's Pesach, that you're still over the isser. But if you don't know what you're doing b'chlal, the Gemara talks about if you pick up a vegetable and you think it's detached and really it's attached, so you did kotzer, that's not a malacha, that's misasik. If a person just stretches and bangs into a branch and knocks it off, that's misasik. That's not malachas machshavas. That's maybe even other isurim that's considered misasik. It's not even a shogeg. Some poskim say that for all isurim in the Torah, if a person is misasik, he doesn't know he's doing the isur. Not just he forgot that it's asur, or he doesn't know that it's Pesach or Shabbos. He doesn't know he's doing the isur at all. Some poskim say that's not an isur at all. So that's one reason. If you don't know you have chametz, that might be misasik. Makar Chaim talks about this. Rabbi Kiva that maybe there's no isur at all. Other poskim say that it's a particular rule in the laws of bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. Bal yirah, bal yimatzeh is only not to own chametz that you know. The Torah didn't prohibit owning chametz that you don't know about. So that's a particular characteristic of the specific prohibitions of bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. It doesn't apply if you don't know that there's chametz. Other poskim invoke the concept of onus. You did everything you could. You did a bedika. What more can you be expected to do? You're an onus. Shgios miyavin. L'nitna Torah l'malachi asharis. God doesn't expect us to have the precision of angels. You did what you could. So anything else, you're an onus. You're not over. The Ran says you rely on chazaka. The Torah allows you to rely on chazaka. We rely on chazakas, that the animal, or rov, or chazaka, the animal is probably not a treifa. So here too, you rely on the chazaka that once you look, there's probably no chametz left. And you're not even over. Even b'diavad, if it turned out there was chametz there, because you were allowed to rely on the chazaka, you don't get an avera if it turns out that there was chametz. Interesting question whether this applies to other areas where you have to be bodik. We just mentioned the example of treifa. So what about checking for bugs? In certain cases, you have to check for bugs. Let's say you do, you check for bugs. You check according to the recommended best practices. You eat the vegetable, and then it turns out there was a bug. Did you get an Isser B'Shogeg? So in the Sefer Ha'aras of Rav Elyashiv, the editor, I guess, somebody, Amar Hamagia, Aleph Hey, says no. He says, yes, you get an Isser. These svaras of the poskim that after Badika, you're not over Bal Yarah, according to some poskim at least, that's specific to Chametz, he says, where there's a mitzvah to do Badika, and once you do the mitzvah, that's it. You're not over Bal Yarah. When it comes to checking for bugs, there's no mitzvah to check. There's an Isser to eat bugs. So if you ate a bug, then it doesn't matter if you checked or not. You're over anyway. You can definitely debate that. The svaras of Misasek, poskim actually discuss whether Misasek is a reason why someone who eats a bug after checking shouldn't be over the Isser. The svar of Anus, you're not Malachi Ashares, Shigios Miyavin, Somchan al Chazakas. Definitely some of those svaras could be applied to bugs as well. And there is indeed a discussion if a person did whatever he could and checked as best as he was able, is he actually over an Isser if he ate the bug? Or do we say it's like Chametz according to some poskim that if you did a Badika as best as you could, you're not over Bal Yarah, Bal Yamatzeh for Chametz. Of course, it only applies if you do check, the same way for Chametz. This whole discussion is if you do a proper Badika and then there was Chametz, poskim debate whether you accidentally violated Bal Yarah, Bal Yamatzeh. If you don't check for the bugs and you're supposed to, that's certainly a problem. But if you do check, or at least most poskim say it's a problem. But if you do check, and you check according to what the halacha asks you to do, then I would say there's at least some basis to say that you might not get an aveira, even b'shogeg, for the bug that you ate. On Daf Gimel, the Gemara has a story. There was a certain Gentile who passed himself off as a Jew, and in Yerushalayim he persuaded them that he was a Jew, and they would give him the carbon Pesach, despite the fact that it says Kol b'nei char li'ochel bo, non-Jew is not allowed to eat the carbon. He bragged to Yehuda ben Beseira, who was in Nitzivin, that I'm getting away with this. You can't stop me. And I guess he didn't have Twitter. He couldn't just call him up and warn them about the guy. I'm getting away with this. That they're giving me the Pesach. Yehuda ben Beseira found a clever way to trap him. He told him, ask them for the Aliyah. You're not getting the Aliyah. He asked for the Aliyah. They said, Aliyah, don't you know Aliyah? You don't eat the Aliyah. It's brought on them as bad. And they realized they caught him, that he really wasn't a Jew, he was an imposter. They killed him. So they discussed, Rabbi Asher discusses why they killed him, but they killed him, and they were very impressed. Yehuda ben Beseira was able to do this all the way out there from the Tzivim. Tosa says that apparently he wasn't actually a Jew, but he passed himself off as a Jew, and he got away with it until Yehuda ben Beseira caught him. So does that mean that anyone who comes, we don't know his background, is simply believed to say, I am a Jew, no proof, no documentation required? Tosa says, not muchach from our Gemara, because in Eretz Yisrael, most people are Jewish. Maybe it's different. However, there are rayas from other Gemaras, he says, that anyone who claims he's a Jew is believed to say he's a Jew. In Yivamas, Tosa says, Rabbeinu Tam said this, that in general, if there's no chazaka that he's not a Jew, we believe him to say he's a Jew. And the way he explains it is, because anyone who comes, anyone who passes himself off as a Jew, there's a rove. Most people who present as Jews are Jews. There's a halachic presumption, a rove. If someone presents as Jewish, he probably is Jewish. Ramosha explains further. Ramosha says it means even if someone is not keeping Torah mitzvahs, he says. It doesn't mean, of course, if he keeps Torah mitzvahs, but even someone who's not observant, not religious, he says. If he considers himself Jewish and there's no presumption to the contrary, no reason to believe to the contrary, he says, then we follow Tosfos' rove that he's probably Jewish. Why? So Tosfos says most non-Jews would not claim they're Jews. People don't want to be Jewish, he says. It's most of the non-Jews are anti-Semites, Sonei Yisrael. They'd be embarrassed to say they're Jewish. So if a person in a non-Jewish environment says he's Jewish, there's a presumption that he's telling the truth, that he is Jewish. And it seems this is how we paskin. Several Rishonim say this. The Ritva says the svara is milsa v'idul. We eventually were likely to discover it. People don't lie about such things. And people do sometimes, but halacha allows you to rely on this. And he says, Ma'asim b'chol yom, that we do this, that we trust people who walk in, we know nothing about their antecedents, they say they're Jewish, we believe them. So this is the opinion of a number of Rishonim. I don't think it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, but a number of Achronim accept this, or Moshe and other contemporary poskim say that the basic bedrock halacha is that if there's no reason to doubt the claim, and someone tells us he's Jewish, even both in Eretz Yisrael, even in Chutz La'aretz, we believe that the person is Jewish. The Chazon Ish brings from the Grach that someone who doesn't know Yiddish, he doesn't know Sfas HaYehudis, even though he says he's Jewish, we don't believe him. We no longer apply the rove. If he doesn't even have basic cultural identity as Jewish, he can't speak Yiddish, then that we don't assume he's Jewish. But the Chazon Ish says That might have been true, that the Grach said that in his context, where it was unthinkable that a Jew wouldn't know Yiddish, he says, but you can't make such a general rule. Many Jews know other languages and have assimilated somewhat, and they don't speak Yiddish, certainly here in the United States it's true. He says, and the basic rule is that we follow Tosfos, that the Rov Haboin, the Torah, Yadus Yisrael, most people who self-identify, who present as Jews, even if there's no proof and they don't keep Torah mitzvahs, it would seem, and like Rav Moshe says, and even if they don't have the cultural knowledge of Yiddish, we still say that there's a Rov that they probably are Jews. On Daf Daled, the Gemara talks about who has to be bodek. If someone rents property, is it the landlord or the tenant who has to be bodek? So in the course of that discussion, the Gemara brings a brisa. If someone rents a home to someone else, who is obligated to put up the mezuzah? We say al hasocher lasos la mezuzah. The tenant has to put up the mezuzah. The Gemara explains that's because mezuzah chavas hadar. The resident has the obligation for mezuzah. So if the tenant is the resident, so he has the obligation of mezuzah. The Beis Yosef in Yardea brings Rabbeinu Manoach, who says that if someone rents a house and the assumption is that there is a mezuzah, it was presumed to have a mezuzah, it turns out there wasn't, the buyer can't back out and say mechachtos, I expected the house to have a mezuzah. The lease is valid anyway, and he explains why based on a Gemara later on this daf, later on Daf Dalam and Beis. The Gemara says a svara that if someone rents a house and it was assumed to be baduk, and it is not baduk, so the Gemara says, is that a mechaktos or not? So the Gemara says it is a mechaktos, because a person would rather do the mitzvah himself. The tenant would rather have the mitzvah. So it's not a mechaktos, because if it's not baduk, it's better for him. You might think the convenience of not having to do b'dikas chametz is an advantage, and therefore it's a mechaktos. On the contrary, the benefit of having a mitzvah to do, whether you do b'dika by yourself, it's a mitzvah to do it b'gufo, whether the minhag is you hire people to do b'dikas chametz, it's a mitzvah to do it b'mamone. People like to have the mitzvah b'dikas chametz. So it wouldn't be a mechaktos because a person is happy to have the mitzvah by himself. And here too, Rabbeinu Manoach says, and this is brought in Shulchan Aruch, here too, the person is happy to have the mitzvah of mezuzah. So even though he thought there was a mezuzah, if he finds out there's no mezuzah, it is not a mechaktos. That's how the Ramah paskins, because the person's very happy to have the mitzvah. A lot of people would probably rather have the money and not have the hassle of getting a mezuzah. But this is the assumption of the poskim and the Shulchan Aruch, that a person would rather have mitzvahs, the maskana the Gemara, the maskana the poskim, a person would rather have mitzvahs, and we assume he's very happy to have the mitzvah of mezuzah, b'dikas chametz. The Gemara brings a brisa later in the sugya. The Gemara says, everyone is neman on bir chametz, on b'dikas chametz, even women and even minors, slaves. The Gemara explains why. Why are they nemanos? So the Gemara says, b'dikas chametz is midrabanan, midaraisa bittul is enough, as we mentioned earlier. Tosfos brought this Gemara. Midaraisa bittul is enough. B'dikas chametz, therefore, is only midrabanan. Women are believed because the requirement to do b'dika, once bittul is being done, the requirement of b'dika is only midrabanan, so we believe women. Tosfos explains, women in general are believed even on issues of midaraisa, at least when it is biyadam, when it's something they're able to do, like to take out the gidanasha or a shchita, that they're able to take off master. Women are believed because they can do it themselves. So even on matters of daraisa. So why does the Gemara seems to imply here that women are only believed on b'dikas chametz because it's drabanan? If it would be daraisa, they wouldn't be believed. So Tosfos says b'dikas chametz, if it's midaraisa, they wouldn't be believed because there's tircha yisera. It's a very tedious, laborious work to do a proper b'dika. It needs diktur gadol. It requires great care and great diligence. And the Yerushalmi says, Nashim Atzlani saying women are lazy, they're not going to make the full effort necessary to do a good bedika. There is an opinion in Rishonim, Meiri, and others explain to Yerushalmi the opposite. Nashim Atzlanius means they're deliberate, means they don't have they're not going out to work like men, they're home, they have more patience, they're more careful, that they do things slowly and deliberately and carefully, they don't have tirdos, they don't have distractions and other affairs. I'm not sure what the Meiri was thinking, and our women certainly at home, even when they're not working, they have plenty of distractions. They have kids running around the house. They have all kinds of things going on in the house. But that's how the Meiri understands Yerushalmi. Women are more focused, they're more deliberate. Women do a better job of a bedika than men. He says, some Mepharshim say the other way, like Tosfos, but ein divrei klum. So Meiri and some Rishonim say that the Yerushalmi means women are certainly bodek, that they certainly are bodek well. But the halacha follows, the halacha of the poskim of the achronim follows the sheet of Tosfos based on the pashas of our Gemara, The women are only believed because B'dikas Chametz is not daraisa. If it would be daraisa, we wouldn't rely on them because since B'dikas Chametz requires great care and diligence, women are not that diligent, are lazy, the Yerushalmi says, and we don't trust them. Shulchan Aruch Harab says, halacha l'maaseh, in a case where you didn't do bittul chametz, you forgot, and now it's past the 6th hour, it's too late to do bittul, you cannot rely on a woman to do bedika, because now the bedika is daraisa, and we don't trust women. In this context, we don't trust women, he says, because bedika, kilchasa, proper bedika, involves great tircha, and women are lazy, and therefore we don't, they do a little bit, they do a token effort, they say we did a good job, and we don't trust them. Similarly, the Mishnah Berurah brings, even when you do bittul, and bedika is drabanan, the Gemara says they are nemanos. Mishnah Berurah brings from earlier achronim from the Magen Avram, Medina, the Gemara says you're allowed to rely on them, but lachatchila you shouldn't, because again, doing bedika is kilchasa, has torach gadol, and we're choshesh they'll be lazy and they won't do a good job. So even if you do bittul, you shouldn't rely on women for bedikas chametz. So that's the mainstream position in the achronim. A couple hundred years ago, Rabbi Avram and Tebi, chief rabbi in Aleppo in Syria, he says, what are you talking about? He says, we see women are incredibly strict about chametz, he says. They're machmer much more than men. They're machmer for tiny amounts of chametz, the cleaning they do, the strictness of chametz. They're machmer much more than men, he says. From Nisan, they're already cleaning. Some women do it before Nisan, they're already cleaning. So he says, even if we accept the basic principle that for issues of daraisa, things that require great tircha, we don't trust women. For bedikas chametz, he says, we see they care very much about bedikas chametz. So he says that we could see that they do it. Maybe he says low plug. That Chazal didn't. Maybe there's a low plug, but he says in Svara women would be nemanos for bedikas chametz. Aruch HaShulchan passes this way. Halacha l'maaseh. He says that on the one hand, the ikra din is we don't rely on women because they're atzlanias, and even if you do bittul chatchila, you shouldn't rely on women. But he says nashi didan, women today, he says our women. They do a great job, he said. They look even for mashus, they clean and everything. He says they're medactic more than men. They're more careful than men, so our women can be trusted. Similarly, Rav Moshe Sternbach, contemporary posek, he writes also that bizmanenu, it's nishtana, things are different today. He says women, Yisrael Kedoshim Haim, the women are tzidkanios, they're very, very strict. They scrape the walls, they clean everything, he says. As a matter of fact, he makes the point that other contemporary poskim say, other late poskim say, our bedikas chametz is anyway really a formality, because we clean so well. We get rid of all the chametz earlier. You still have to do a bedika, he says. You have to explain to them they have to do a bedika, but certainly we trust them for the house cleaning, which is primarily what we rely on anyway, he says. But minadin, he says, you can rely on her bedika. Everyone is nemanis for bedikas chametz, certainly after you do bittul, he says. Just explain to her that she has to do a real bedika, even though she cleaned, he says. That maybe you'll say she won't do a bedika, she'll rely on the cleaning, but you can explain it to her, he says. Minadin, he says her bedika works. Lo chilku chazal, at least in the case where you do a bittul, lo chilku chazal. And certainly today, he says, the metzias is, our women are quite careful about chametz, and we shouldn't say that we don't trust them. On Daf Hey, the Gemara talks about the question of the parameters of Bal Yarah, Bal Yamatzah. A Jew is not allowed to own chametz on Pesach. The Gemara brings a brisa that has an apparent stira. The Gemara says that Bal Yarah l'chasar, you can't have sar, and it can't be yours, but if a non-Jew has chametz in your possession, that's okay. But then the brisa says that you can't accept a pikadon from a guy, you can't accept a security, you can't accept custodianship of something from a non-Jew, because it says lo yimatzeh regardless. So the beginning of the brisa says you're allowed to have property in your possession if it belongs to a non-Jew. The end of the brisa says you're not allowed to accept property of a non-Jew to be in your house on Pesach. How does that work? The Gemara says that the question is that the key criterion is if the Jew is mekabel achrayos, if he accepts responsibility for it, liability for it, then it's aser, even though it's not his. If the Jew is mekabel achrayos, then there's a problem of Bal Yarah, Bal Yamatzah. If he's not mekabel achrayos, then it is okay. There's a discussion whether achrayos means from anything, or even if it's only achrayos from gross negligence, from Shia. But achrayos is a problem, even if it's a non-Jew's chametz. This is how we paskin. Then the Jew violates Bal Yarah, Bal Yamatzah. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara brings a story. Rava told the Bnei Mechuzah, Bi'eru chamira divnei chela mibataychu. He told people in Mechuzah, you have to be mavar, you have to get rid of the chametz of Bnei Chela, who are non-Jews. Why? Because even though it's not yours, if it gets stolen, ilu mignav, ilu misva, the Gemara says Gnev and Aveda. So we have a debate. I said whether it's, what about if the achrayus is only for Pshia? Gnev and Aveda is a higher level of liability. But since if there'd be Gnev and Aveda, it would be B'rshu Saichukai, and you have to pay for it, it's like it's yours. Many Rishonim understand that's just a reiteration of the previous rule, that if the Jew accepts upon himself legal liability for the chametz, Gnev and Aveda, Pshia, whatever it is, then he's chayiv. Rambam apparently understands that even if there's no legal liability, if there is de facto liability, if we know that they're going to hold you responsible, if we know that they're going to, the non-Jews are going to make you pay for it, then there is then it's also asur. That's how the Rambam paskins. Even if it's they're going to force him onus, they're going to force you to pay for it, even though you accepted no legal formal responsibility, even that's asur. The Raavad disagrees. Shulchan Aruch paskins the basic halacha that if you're makabel achrayus from Gnev and Aveda, and some say even Pshia, even if you're only makabel achrayus from Pshia, then there's a chiyuv bir, there's an isser b'yira b'yimatzeh. And then the Shulchan Aruch brings that even if you have no legal formal achrayus, but there's achrayus ones that you know he's going to force you to pay for it, even that's a chiyuv bir v'yesh cholkim. The Raavad shita, some say that does not force you to be mevar. The Mishnah Berurah adds that even if you're going to say that achrayus ones is not enough, if there's legal achrayus, if there's din hamalchus that you're chayav b'achrayus, then that's also considered achrayus. That's also apparently considered achrayus. It sounds like you're saying even if there's no, that's better than onus. Onus maybe not, but legal achrayus it sounds like is going to be sufficient to be mechayev. The Mishnah Berurah says l'chatchila you should be choshesh even if you only have achrayus from Pshia, a limited achrayus. Then that the l'chatchila at least you should be choshesh for that. The Mishnah Berurah also adds an important leniency, which we'll discuss more in a moment, that this isser, if you're makabel achrayus for the chametz of a non-Jew, is only if the chametz is in your possession, or maybe even if you put it in a third-party non-Jew's possession. But if it's in the original owner, the original non-Jewish owner's possession, even if you're makabel achrayus, if it's in his possession and it's his chametz and all you have is achrayus, then there's no isser b'yira b'yimatzeh. Now there is a discussion in the poskim whether b'diavad. The Gemara is talking about l'chatchila, you're chayav to mevayer if you have achrayus. L'chatchila, you're not allowed to do that on Pesach. You're not allowed to keep achrayus on chametz without destroying it. There is a debate as to whether b'diavad. B'diavad, we know if you don't sell chametz and you don't get rid of it, then it's asur after Pesach. Chametz shavar of a Pesach. There's a debate whether that applies even to this chametz, which is not really yours, but you had achrayus for it. That's a debate. Many poskim, most poskim are machmer that is an isser of bal yirah, and even b'diavad it becomes chametz shavar of a Pesach. Rav Asher Weiss says that there are some poskim who are lenient, and even though certainly the halacha l'chatchila follows the stringent view, he says it is a machlokus on a drabanan, and he says there are Rishonim who said already that it's only asur l'chatchila, but b'diavad it's mutter. So he says b'shas adchak, he says in a case of serious tachak, there'd be basis for leniency that even though you shouldn't do it l'chatchila, but after the Pesach the chametz won't become asur, so there is some basis for leniency. But l'chatchila certainly you're not allowed to retain achrayus on a non-Jewish chametz over Pesach. Contemporary poskim, Rabbi Tzvi Reisman of LA has a lengthy essay on this. Contemporary poskim discuss whether if a Jew issues insurance on the chametz of a non-Jew, he doesn't take actual achrayus in the sense of custodianship, but he accepts liability. He agrees that he'll be responsible for the chametz of a non-Jew. He'll have legal liability if it gets destroyed. Is that called achrayus? Poskim debate that for various reasons. Some poskim say that's not real achrayus. That's just a business deal. That's a promise to pay for something, to indemnify the owner for loss. That's different from the classic achrayus we're talking about, where you actually accept the pikadon and you accept that I'll be responsible for this and I'll pay you if it gets lost. It's a delicate and subtle question, but some poskim understand that the achrayus of an insurance company is different from the achrayus of the shomer, of someone who accepts custodianship responsibility for property. Also, in insurance, you're dealing with corporations where there is no personal liability, an additional basis for leniency. Another question poskim talk about is every mechiras chametz. Typically, though we do it today, the non-Jew does not pay the full value of the chametz up front. He pays he pays a nominal amount, and we tell him that eventually, when you keep the chametz, you'll pay the full assessed value. You'll pay the value at a later date. But the non-Jew hasn't paid very much for it. We sell thousands of dollars, could be a lot more, hundreds of thousands, and maybe millions of dollars of chametz to non-Jews, we often sell it to a simple non-Jew not of great means. There's no way he's going to pay the rest of the money. If something goes wrong, the chametz goes up in flames, and you want to tell him, okay, sorry, you bought the chametz, it all burned down, and now we're not. Now you're not going to. Now you have to pay us for the rest of it. Normally, what happens is we buy it back, so it's a wash. He owes us the money for buying it, but we buy it back, so it all cancels out. If the chametz all gets burned up before we buy it back, we have the right to tell him, your chametz got burned. Please pay us the outstanding balance. He's not going to pay that. It's unthinkable. He's not going to pay that much money. So maybe that's called achrayus, that we have achrayus, because if the chametz gets burned, we're not getting our money back. So we're essentially accepting achrayus, that if something goes wrong with the chametz, we're not getting our money. But some poskim felt that was actually a problem, and therefore if the non-Jew hasn't paid up the full value up front, then we're going to be responsible if the chametz gets lost. That's a problem, and the only solution is to make sure that you actually sell the premises in which the chametz is located to the non-Jew. We sell the premises, and some people sell the premises for various reasons. This is one of the reasons. So at that point, it becomes chemso shel non-Jew in the premises of a non-Jew. And that, we mentioned earlier, many poskim, the Mishnah Berurah is lenient that you don't have to worry about Kabbalas Achrayus if the premises actually belong to a non-Jew. However, that doesn't work so well in Eretz Yisrael. You're not supposed to sell real property in Eretz Yisrael to a non-Jew, so it's more of an issue. So that's one reason. Again, Rav Yaakov Epstein in the Chevel Nachlasa points out that that's one potential weakness in the sale of chametz. There are many weaknesses in the sale of chametz that we do. That's one of them, that there's a question of achrayus. And he points out, though many poskim say that's not considered achrayus, just as we discussed earlier with insurance, that there are many poskim, the Chayadam, the earlier poskim have said, that's not called achrayus of onus. The fact that if the chametz gets burned, he's not going to see himself as responsible. He's not going to pay you the outstanding balance. That's not the same thing as achrayus, where the people in B'nai Chelag are knocking on your door and say, you're responsible for my chametz, I'm taking money away from you. If the non-Jew takes money as payment for the lost chametz, that's achrayus. If the non-Jew just says, I'm not paying you the outstanding balance, again, it's a subtle distinction, but many poskim say that's not considered the non-Jew having achrayus for the chametz of a non-Jew. The fact that ultimately, in terms of accounting and balance sheets, it boils down to the same thing. That if the chametz gets destroyed, you won't have your money. That's still not called achrayus, and therefore many poskim are more lenient, and they say that our mechiras chametz is not considered a Jew accepting achrayus for the chametz of a non-Jew, even if we don't sell the premises, and even if the chametz wouldn't be located in the premises of the non-Jew, even if the chametz is located in the premises of a Jew, some poskim say that's not considered Kabbalas Achrayus, and therefore the Jew does not violate Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzeh in such a situation.